Welcome to Feminist Question Time, brought to you by Women's Declaration International, the leading global organization defending women's sex-based rights against the threats posed by gender identity ideology. There's more information on the website, womensdeclaration.com, where you will find our Declaration on Women's Sex-Based Rights, which has been signed by over 37,000 people from 160 countries and is supported by 527 organizations. We have volunteer activists, including country contacts from every continent. Please join us. You can also become a member of WDI to help our work by volunteering or donating. You can reach out to us at info@womensdeclaration.com or via your country contact on the website. So for today, we have Rona Duwe from Germany, who will talk about the self-ID bill that passed recently. I will address the recent changes to the Title IX implementing regulations in the United States. We have Menasche with Feminists in Struggle, and we'll talk about our radical roots, which is Feminists in Struggle, or FIST's first national organizing conference. And finally, we will have Carolina Franssen from the Netherlands, who will talk about how the Netherlands has removed self-ID from the discussion, which is fantastic news. So with that, I will turn it over to Rona.
I want to talk about the German Self-Determination Act, which is called Selbstbestimmungsgesetz in Germany and passed on the 12th of April 2024. I want to talk about the prehistory first, about the German Transsexuals Act. After Sweden, Germany was one of the first countries in Europe to enable the legal fiction of sex change through a transsexual law in 1981. The decisive factor was a judgment by the Federal Constitutional Court in 1978, which ordered the legislator to create a regulation on the basis of human dignity and the fundamental right to free development of the personality. This case was a grown-up man who had crushed one of his testicles and afterwards had his genitals surgically removed and came to believe he was a woman from birth on and had taken his case to the Constitutional Court in Germany. The court decided that he was allowed to falsify his sex entry in the birth register and register a female name. Since 1st January 1981, the Transsexuals Act came into law in Germany. Since then already, men and women in Germany have been able to apply for a change of name via the minor solution. And there also was a major solution for the change of civil status, and the sex entry in the birth register was also changed. Even at the time, this law was controversial, as the CDU, the conservatives in particular, foresaw that this legal fiction would cause many problems. As today, however, the liberals, the FDP, and the SPD, the Social Democrats in particular, praised it as the most progressive law in Europe, and even then had plans to extend this legislation to the EU. Women's rights, which are fortunately enshrined in Article 3 of the German Constitution and are in conflict with the transsexual law, were ignored. The argument was always that it is such a tiny minority. The first prerequisites for the Great Solution were initially to no longer feel to belong to the birth entry and to have been under compulsion to live according to their ideas for at least 3 years. A high probability that the feeling of belonging to the opposite sex will no longer change. They had to be at least 25 years old. They had to sterilize themselves, and they had to undergo a surgical procedure to change their external sexual characteristics. They also had to be divorced. Then the trans activists in Germany went through several court cases and softened the law. And the age limit of 25 years was deleted. Then the sterilization was no longer required. Also, the gender reassignment treatment was no longer required. And divorce also was no longer necessary to change the sex entry. There were only a few conditions remaining. This was 2 independent expert opinions that had to establish that the person feels that they belong to the opposite sex, that they had been under pressure to live in accordance with these ideas for at least 3 years, and there is a high probability that their sense of belonging to the opposite sex will no longer change. They also had to confirm it by a legal court, and they had to pay for it themselves. The costs were approximately 2,500 euro, but they could be covered by legal aid. Since 2017, Germany also had a third sex entry, diverse, for people with an intersex condition. It protects the gender identity of persons who feel that they neither belong to the male or female sex. So they had already fantasy in the law in Germany. Since 2020, this entry has even been possible for people with an alleged non-binary gender identity via the transsexual law after an assessment. Trans activists have labeled all these assessments as unreasonable, agonizing, and humiliating, and claim that they are unconstitutional. However, this is not true, as the Federal Constitutional Court ruled in 2017 that an assessment is still reasonable and the claim to change the sex entry was rarely rejected. So the German transsexual law was already, therefore, very, very liberal. Now I want to talk about the self-determination law. Since 2014, trans activists lobbied German politics, especially in the family and women's ministry. In 2017, the Greens delivered a first draft of a self-ID law. In 2020, the Liberals and the Greens delivered two separate drafts to push through a self-determination law based on the Yogyakarta principles in Germany. In 2021, an initial bill was rejected in parliament by the grand coalition of CDU, the Conservatives, and SPD, the Social Democrats at the time. In autumn 2021, the traffic light coalition was voted from SPD, the Social Democrats, Greens, and Liberals, and they promised in their coalition agreement that they would implement a self-determination law as soon as possible. The first queer commissioner of Germany, Sven Lehmann, promised from the outset that it would be passed very quickly. However, with combined forces and many actions, protests, letters to politicians, and raising awareness among the public and the press, we were able to delay it until April 2024. So 3 years. The actual passing of the law was announced at very short notice and just a few days before the deadline at 12th April 2024. It was scheduled for a Friday lunchtime when the Bundestag is usually particularly empty. And the votes were 374 votes in favor, 251 against, and 11 abstentions. So we had only a lead of 10 votes. We also had a very short protest at this day organized, and about 100 people came from all over Germany to protest against the law. If we would have had more time, a lot more people would have come. So this German self-determination law is, in my view, one of the most permissive and dangerous self-ID laws in Europe. As Germany serves as a role model for other EU states, it is to be feared that other EU states will also be pressured to follow the German example. Austria has already shown corresponding endeavors. Any protection against abuse has been removed from the law that was passed. For example, the Federal Criminal Police Office and the Ministry of Interior had enforced that an official check of the person should take place when a change of sex entry is requested. They then launched a petition against it, which was signed by many well-known female authors, influencers, queer ideologues, and women's organizations in Germany. They called for distrust and discrimination to be removed from the law, and for genuine self-determination to be made possible. Afterwards, they deleted the official check of the person. So I show you some details of the Self-Determination Act. Any man can declare himself a woman and change his first name by making a simple declaration at the registry office without any checks. The change of sex entry does not have to be permanent, but may be changed once a year. Also, the first name may be changed once a year. Different entries are possible at choice. Male, female, diverse, no entry. These are used for people who want to change a sex entry from female to male or male to female, people who want a diverse sex entry, people with variants of sex development, aka intersex, or non-binary, without presenting any certificates, and people who do not want a sex entry, non-binary, for example. However, none of the four parties will undergo any kind of verification in the form of an expert opinion. If a person's gender entry and first names have been changed in the civil status register, they may request that entries relating to their gender and first names be changed in official registers. The fantasy gender non-binary is thus declared a legal fact in the Self-Determination Act. Parents can determine the gender is the sex entry of their children themselves from babyhood, from age 0. From the age of 5, children should declare to the registrar that they agree to the change of sex entry. They are thus declared capable of giving consent from the age of 5. From the age of 14, adolescents may decide on their own sex entry. However, parental consent is required. If the parents do not agree, a family court can be called to override the parent's veto. For separated parents, there is a risk that the parent who refuses to change the sex entry will lose custody. The minor must declare that they have received counseling, but they don't have to prove it. And in the case of minors, the sex entry may be changed at any time. A prohibition on disclosure prohibits the naming of a person's sex and former name. This prohibition now also applies to family members in the adopted law. The intention is decisive there. Anyone who does not name the sex and former name with the intention of causing offense and in a friendly manner is to remain unpunished. Anyone who violates the ban on disclosure will face a fine of up to 10,000 euros. Quotas for women are cancelled. Gender identity, not sex, is decisive for women's quotas now. In the event of war, men may not declare themselves to be women and will be drafted as men. On the birth certificate of newborns, the gender entry of the parents at the time of birth is taken into account, not the sex. Instead of father or mother, the neutral formulation parent can be entered there. In the case of legally incompetent persons, for example, mentally disabled adults, the carers decide on the gender entry. However, a local court is also involved here. Sex-based rooms, women's rooms, women's shelters, women's prison, and women's sports should only be able to maintain in individual cases via domestic and owners' law and the General Equal Treatment Act in Germany. So, some possible consequences of this irresponsible legislation: arbitrary changes of the sex entry of babies and young children by their parents or guardians will make it easier to conceal the identity of these children. This can be used for child abuse and child trafficking. Parents could use the loophole of changing the sex entry of their child at will to carry out female genital mutilation on baby girls for religious reasons. This is because the circumcision of boys is permitted in Germany for religious reasons. Babies and small children are no longer protected from the fictional worldviews of their parents and guardians. The draft does not contain any regulations on sex reassignment surgery, but lays the foundations. Giving even small children the idea that they can change sex paves the way for physically invasive measures. By defining non-binary as a gender identity, this target group will presumably be prepared for elective surgery and hormone administration, as health insurance in Germany have so far not paid for mastectomies for women who declare themselves to be non-binary. Adults who are legally incompetent, for example, mentally disabled people, are also at the mercy of their carers' ideas about their gender identity. Quotas for women are a thing of the past in Germany. This also means that the function of an equal opportunities officer, previously reserved for women, who are supposed to ensure the implementation of Chapter 3 of the German Basic Law, the Equal Rights for Women, is no longer necessary. Women's prisons have been de facto abolished in Germany. Since a women's prison can only refuse a man who identifies as a woman on grounds of discrimination in individual cases, a man can be transferred to a women's prison at his request. This is already happening. Experimental hormone treatments and plastic surgery for these offenders in prison are already financed by the general public in Germany. At the end of his sentence, the man can change his gender entry back to man. This is already happening in Germany. In women's sport, too, the decision as to whether a man may participate in a women's team is deferred to the sports club. If the club refuses, the man could sue his way onto the team via the General Equal Treatment Act. The prohibition of disclosure creates an additional hurdle in these conflicts, as a man may not be addressed as a man. Since women are liable to prosecution if they name the sex of a man who has changed his sex entry, they can no longer defend themselves against the presence of a man in previously sex-specific spaces. No woman knows whether a man has changed his sex entry. A man can therefore simply walk into these rooms and claim this. After all, he no longer has to make any changes to his external appearance. This creates a chilling effect for girls and women. Previously safe spaces become spaces of fear. The legislator knows who a man is in the event of war. However, it gives men 2 months to change their gender entry before a possible armed conflict. A man with a dual nationality can be registered as a man in Spain and as a woman in Germany. There are no rules for sex-based statistics, for example, violence and crime statistics. It is therefore to be expected that these statistics will no longer be meaningful in the future and, above all, will conceal the predominantly male perpetrators. Since there is no longer any verification before a change of civil status, offenders can use this law to change their identity at will. So the law is set to come into force on 1st November 2024. A change of sex entry can already be requested on 1st August 2024. The law will go through the Federal Council again. It is not already through. It will go through the Federal Council again on 17th May, but does not require approval. We now have the situation that the Committee on Internal Affairs has submitted a request to convene a mediation committee to resume the regulation according to which registration authorities had to inform the Federal Criminal Police Office, the Federal Police, the Office for the Protection of the Constitution, and various other federal authorities about the change of gender entry of a person before the change of sex entry and change of first name. They speak of a considerable threat to internal security if the law is passed in this form. But the Family and Youth Committee and the Legal Affairs Committee still do not see any problems. The issue of security for women and children is not being taken seriously, despite warnings from many quarters. If the request to convene a mediation committee is successful, the law will go back to Bundestag. But we don't expect that, as the leading committee is the Family and Youth Committee. As the law is unconstitutional in several points, for example, regarding women's rights for equality or regarding freedom of expression, freedom of the press and academic freedom, or regarding several children's and parents' rights, we try to convince the CDU, the Conservatives, or the Bavarian government to file an abstract action for a judicial review. We also try to convince the president of Germany to not sign the law. If the law comes into force, we are considering a constitutional complaint. The transgender activists of Germany also consider a constitutional complaint, as the self-determination in their eyes goes not far enough. They want to delete the domestic authority for women's shelters, women's saunas, or women's sports. And they claim to be discriminated on the basis of the General Equal Treatment Act. They also want to lower the age of consent for minors and abolish the consent of parents. The only positive aspect is that with the self-determination law, the German Transsexuals Act has been abolished. If we are successful in having the Self-Determination Act declared unconstitutional by the Federal Constitutional Court, both the Transsexuals Act and the Self-Determination Act could become a thing of the past. This is our only hope. Thank you.
So now we'll switch to the United States, where I will talk about recent amendments to the Title IX regulations. So I know there are probably a lot of questions about Title IX, which I'm happy to answer. But I'll just give a general overview of the recent amendments, starting with a little bit of history. So one of Title IX's main authors was Patsy Takemoto Mink. Mink was born to Japanese immigrants on a sugar plantation in Hawaii. After earning her law degree at the University of Chicago in 1951, she had trouble finding work at a law firm due to rampant sex and race discrimination. She ultimately made her way to the House of Representatives, where she was a fierce advocate on behalf of women and children. After Mink died in 2002, Congress officially renamed the law the Patsy T. Mink Equal Opportunity in Education Act in her memory. Title IX was enacted in 1972. The statute itself is quite straightforward and reads simply that no person in the United States shall, on the basis of sex, be excluded from participation in, be denied the benefits of, or be subjected to discrimination under any education program or activity receiving federal financial assistance. Many people think that Title IX relates exclusively to sports, and it has in fact come to be primarily associated with sports, but the scope of the law covers all aspects of the US educational arena. The entire point of the law was to elevate the position of women and girls in schools, including in school-sponsored sports. Coincidentally, 1972 was also the year the Boston Marathon began admitting women. 5 years before that, in 1967, which is what you see here, a woman named Catherine Switzer had registered to compete in the marathon using only her initials on her registration form. At the time, the registration rules made no mention of sex. So although her participation was technically legal because the marathon did not officially exclude women, one of the organizers, a man named Jock Semple, tried to remove her from the race physically by assaulting her. That's what you can see here. So she says in her memoir during that race, and I'm quoting her here, "A man with an overcoat and felt hat was then in the middle of the road shaking his finger at me. He said something to me as I passed and reached out for my hand, catching my glove instead and pulling it off. I did a kind of stutter step. We all had to jostle around him. I thought he was just a nutty spectator, but when I passed, I caught a glimpse of a blue and gold ribbon in his lapel. Where had he come from? Moments later, I heard the scraping noise of leather shoes coming up fast behind me, an alien and alarming sound amid the muted thump of rubber-soled running shoes. When a runner hears that kind of noise, it's usually danger, like hearing a dog's paws on the pavement. Instinctively, I jerked my head around quickly and looked square into the most vicious face I had ever seen. A big man, a huge man, with bared teeth, was set to pounce. And before I could react, he grabbed my shoulder and flung me back, screaming, 'Get the hell out of my race and give me your numbers.' Then he swiped down my front, trying to rip off my number, just as I leapt backward from him. He missed the numbers, but I was so surprised and frightened that I slightly wet my pants and turned to run. By now, the man had the back of my shirt and was swiping at the bib number on my back. The air was filled only with the clicking whir of motor drive cameras, scuffling sounds, and faintly, one cameraman screeching something I couldn't understand. The bottom was dropping out of my stomach. I had never felt such embarrassment and fear. I'd never been manhandled, never even spanked as a child, and the physical power and swiftness of the attack stunned me. I felt unable to flee, like I was rooted there, and indeed I was, because the man, this jock guy, had me by the shirt. So this man was, of course, angry that a woman was running in the marathon. She was running with her coach and boyfriend, both of whom managed to help her escape, and she ended up finishing the race, the first woman to do so officially. Switzer was a 19-year-old journalism student at Syracuse University in 1966. She wanted to run cross country, but there was no women's team, so she started training with the men's team. That's where she met the man who would become her coach. But there was no women's team at Syracuse University because no one thought women could run long distances. Men literally worried and actually said out loud that if women ran long distances, their uteruses would fall out and they would all turn into lesbians, as though that's a bad thing. Anyway, it was for women like Switzer and countless others that Patsy Mink worked so hard to enact Title IX. So in 1972, Title IX was enacted and the Boston Marathon officially began admitting women. After Title IX was enacted, it became clear that schools and universities would need some guidance in implementing it. So the Department of Education got to work on issuing regulations, which it did in 1975. The regulations explicitly allow for sex separation in a variety of areas, including the provision of student housing, toilet, locker room, and shower facilities, contact sports in physical education classes, human sexuality classes, athletic scholarships, and, critically, separate teams for members of each sex, where selection for such teams is based on competitive skill or the activity involved is a contact sport. And contact sport is explicitly defined to mean boxing, wrestling, rugby, ice hockey, football, basketball, and other sports, the purpose or major activity of which includes bodily contact. The only requirement was that where schools chose to separate students by sex under any of those circumstances, they must do so equally. So that means single-sex housing and toilet facilities must be of equal quality and cleanliness and things like that. So the Department of Education in 1975 explicitly understood that there would be sex separation under certain circumstances. All of that is gone, because the Department of Education has now officially redefined sex to include so-called gender identity for all Title IX purposes, and that change is scheduled to take effect August 1st. The changes don't affect the wording of the statute itself, but President Biden has effectively decimated women and girls as a sex class by redefining the word sex in terms of how the statute is enforced. The new rule was initially announced as a proposed rule in June 2022. After issuing the proposed rule, the Department of Education received over 250,000 public comments, the most in department history. Many groups, including WDI USA, provided commentary to help members of the public make the department understand how unpopular its policy of erasing women and girls is. As predicted, the department has ignored the will of the vast majority of the American electorate. There's nothing more we can do to persuade the Biden administration to roll back its decimation of women's sex-based rights under Title IX. I don't think there's any chance it's going to back down before the November presidential election. But it's important to note that the Biden administration is out of step with the American electorate. I'm happy to report that WDI USA did some polling in 2023, showing that 4 out of 5 US voters across the political spectrum say that the word women means adult humans who are female. 84% say an all-female high school basketball team should face opponents who are female only. And 85% say when a female gym member is showering and changing in the women's locker room, the other users in the locker room should be female only. So what is to be done? There are 3 ways Congress could fix this. One is enacting the Protection of Women and Girls in Sports Act, which is currently before the US Senate. That would be a partial fix because it would only address sports. The second is enacting the Women's Bill of Rights, which is currently before the US House of Representatives. WDI USA supports both the Protection of Women and Girls in Sports Act and the Women's Bill of Rights. Third, Congress could enact a standalone bill to clarify that sex means sex, not gender identity, under Title IX. Now, we don't think the current Congress will do any of those things. It could if it had the will. And of course, even if it did, President Biden would surely veto any legislative attempts to define sex accurately in the law. The Supreme Court could fix this too. Several lawsuits have already been filed challenging the new Title IX rules directly, which is good. But in the meantime, there are a few other court cases making their way through the courts that could easily end up at the Supreme Court. So what you're looking at now is the cover page of a brief that WDI USA filed in a case called BPJ versus West Virginia. This is a case involving a young man who has sued the state of West Virginia, challenging West Virginia's law that mandates single-sex sports. The state won at the lower court level, where a judge ruled that keeping sports single-sex is consistent with Title IX. To our great surprise, the judge who issued that ruling was appointed by President Clinton. To the best of my knowledge, that's the only time a judge appointed by a Democratic president has ruled in favor of the material reality of sex and in favor of women's sex-based rights. BPJ, the young male plaintiff, appealed, and WDI USA filed a friend of the court brief in the case, pointing out that single-sex sports is consistent with Article 7 of the Declaration. Unfortunately, the state lost on appeal because the appellate court decided that sex includes so-called gender identity under Title IX. We're currently waiting to see whether the state will ask the Supreme Court to review that decision. And if it does, that will present an opportunity for WDI USA to present its radical feminist critique of gender identity before the Supreme Court. And that would be the first time we would have an opportunity to do so. Nice versus Becerra is a different case. It's not about sports, but it is about Title IX indirectly. In addition to shredding women's existence in the educational arena, the Biden administration has decided to obliterate sex in the provision of healthcare, which is pretty insane. In this case, a man refused treatment for prostate cancer because he believes that because he identifies as a woman, he can't possibly have a prostate. His doctor receives federal funding and is worried that he'll lose that funding if he insists on treating his male patient's prostate cancer. The lower court ruled in that case that sex is real in the provision of healthcare. And because the law in question there references Title IX, the court effectively ruled that sex is real under Title IX too, which is great. That case is currently on appeal, and WDI USA has filed a friend of the court brief in support of the material reality of sex, and of course, quoting the Declaration extensively. That case could make it to the Supreme Court as well. Regardless of what happens, we're not backing down. We have good reason to believe that congressional Democrats are not as captured as they appear to be. In 2022, when the original Title IX changes were proposed, a group of Senate Democrats issued a public letter supporting them. However, only 19 Senate Democrats put their names on that letter, which is fewer than half of Senate Democrats. In late 2023, a group of House Democrats issued a statement urging the Biden administration to push through the changes, but that letter was signed by only 64 House Democrats, which is fewer than a quarter of all House Democrats. It appears that even in the US Congress, a clear majority of Democrats do not actually support this, despite what they might say in public or on Twitter. WDI USA continues to find ways to pressure congressional Democrats to say out loud what we all know to be true, that women and girls exist as a sex class. And we'll keep fighting in the courts too. We will not stop until the Biden administration's decimation of women's rights is remedied one way or another. Thank you. I wanted to add something about the BPJ versus West Virginia case, which is that some of you may have seen or heard the story of the 5 middle school girls who refused to compete against a male athlete and were subsequently banned from competing in their own sport. That was in West Virginia, and that matter involved the actual plaintiff in the BPJ case. So BPJ is a young man. I'm very sorry to say he has been on puberty blockers since the age of 11, and my understanding is he's on cross-sex hormones now. Nonetheless, he still has an athletic advantage, and these girls are experiencing that. And so 5 brave middle school students, and I meant to say he's been competing this whole time while the case has been going on. And very recently, 5 middle school girls refused to compete against him. It was an incredibly brave thing that they did. And they were banned from subsequent competition, but then they turned around and sued. And my understanding is they have some preliminary relief. So I just wanted everyone to know, if you happen to be following that case involving the middle school girls who refused to compete, That is in this case. It's the very same case. They refused to compete against BPJ himself. So we'll be monitoring that and seeing where that goes. And I'll very quickly mention a few other cases that don't relate to Title IX, but where WDI USA has also filed friend of the court briefs. One of them is called Westonbrook versus KKG. This is the case involving a sorority that admitted a man into the sorority in violation of its very own bylaws. And some brave young women sued to get him out of the sorority, and they lost their case, and that's now on appeal, and we have filed a brief in that case. There's another case called Olympus Spa, where a women-only spa was required to admit a man who claims to be a woman. And this is not a women's section of a spa. This is a completely women-only spa. And the State Human Rights Commission told them that they had to admit this man. And so they turned around and sued the State Human Rights Commission, which is pretty brave. They also lost at the district court level because the district court decided that the man is a woman. And they appealed, and that case is on appeal, and we filed a friend of the court brief there as well. And then there's an interesting case called LW versus Skermetti. This case could go before the Supreme Court as well. This is a case out of Tennessee where Tennessee enacted a law prohibiting puberty blockers and wrong sex hormones for kids. A bunch of kids sued. They ultimately won. I'm sorry, the state ultimately won on appeal. In a pretty astonishing ruling where the appellate court ruled that the phrase transgender people isn't a coherent category for constitutional purposes, which is really quite amazing. And we filed a friend of the court brief there as well. The kids who filed the lawsuit are represented by the ACLU. The ACLU has asked the Supreme Court to take that case, and we're still waiting to see whether the Supreme Court will take that case. We're going to move on to Anne Menasche from FIST, or Feminists in Struggle, who will talk about our radical roots, FIST's first national organizing conference. Thanks, Anne. Over to you.
All right. Well, this is a great takeoff from what Kara said. We need to organize, sisters, and Feminists in Struggle has had planned to have a conference before COVID and canceled. So we are finally having our first conference. It's an organizing conference, and it happens to be July 4th weekend, which is an Independence Day in the US. And so it is time for us as women, as a sex, to declare our independence from patriarchy. So we have a beautiful location that we've found about an hour from San Diego. It has gardens, walkways, good food, comfy beds, and a swimming pool. There will be workshops and plenaries with lots of time for discussion and for planning to build our multi-issue radical feminist, democratically run membership organization. And we're very, very excited that this is happening. Okay, we are a multi-issue radical feminist organization. Many of us have deep roots in various radical and revolutionary traditions of the second wave of feminism, which was the last real wave. And we're in a ripple right now. I'm excited to be part of that ripple that'll turn into a wave. We as Feminists in Struggle are one of the earliest signers of the Declaration for Women's Sex-Based Rights. We are gender abolitionists, united by 13 principles, including, of course, support for women-only spaces, programs, and organizations against infringement by trans-identified males, and of course, challenging gender identity ideology overall. We oppose male supremacy, white supremacy, and fight for all women, not just the privileged few. We are run democratically by our membership, and we fight for the full array of women's liberation causes, old and new, abortion right, including the abortion rights, the Equal Rights Amendment, lesbian rights, free childcare, paid parental leave, and a universal health care. We oppose all forms of male violence against women, and we support the abolition of prostitution and pornography through the Nordic model. We are financially supported by our membership, and we take no money from the organized right or big corporations or political parties at all. We support building an independent women's liberation movement, subordinate to no one. And for more information and to see the 13 principles, look at our website, www.feministstruggle.org. So we have a lot of really exciting topics that we'll be discussing at our gathering in July. one that I will be on about witch hunts, no more witch hunts, tactics and strategies for defending feminist jobs, livelihoods, and public activism. Very, very timely issue as we fight back, under the witch hunt that we're under and that I personally experienced. Our radical roots will be another plenary about taking back the left for feminism, where feminism, radical feminism comes from, and how we've been betrayed by our brothers, and how we can change that picture. The colonization of womanhood, there'll be a workshop on that subject, transing away the lesbian, strategies for ending the homophobic practice of gender affirming care. That'll be another workshop. Defending women's spaces, a very important issue, and there'll be a focus on battered women's shelters and prisons. The importance of the Equal Rights Amendment. Now, this I know is controversial within this larger group. Hopefully we'll have an opportunity to debate this at one point, but we do support the Equal Rights Amendment and think we can fight for women's spaces and programs at the same time as we fight for legal equality. We will have a whole session on strategies for winning back abortion rights, which is very important right now, of course, in the United States, where we've lost almost everything, and many more. So we have a impressive list of speakers that will be participating at the conference. One is Max Dashiell, I'm sure most people heard of. She's a very well-known feminist historian. Kathy Sarachild, who I'm not sure if everyone has heard of, but they should. She goes way back, before me even. A founding mother of second wave feminism, involved in the earliest radical feminist organizations in New York. And she has just an incredible amount of background and experience that she can share with us. I will be there. Denise Traina, who is a co-chair of the Georgia Green Party. The Georgia Green Party supported and continues to support the declaration, and basically got witch hunted out of the larger U.S. party a few years ago. Denise was part of that struggle. So that's a really important, that was a very important struggle, and it continues. Fran Luck, who has a radio show on WBAI New York, the only feminist radio show that's not just online, but is actually on the ground in the country, as far as we know, and she will be there. Dr. Suzanne Verling, who's been on here multiple times, will be attending. Merle Hoffman, who is a very well-known pro-choice activist from way back. He's the founder of one of the earliest abortion clinics, the Choices Clinic in New York, author of a new book, Choices, a Post-Roe Abortion Rights Manifesto, and she will be leading our discussion about how we fight back against the attacks on abortion rights. We have Hilla Kerner from Vancouver Rape Relief, which is one of the only, maybe the only women-only place for women to go who are experiencing male violence in Canada. And their organization is really a model for all of us in organizing women-only spaces that are very clearly feminist spaces, especially refugees from male violence. And that's just a taste of what's going to be going on. And this is something that used to happen in many feminist conferences in the past, but it's been a while. We will actually discuss and vote a proposal for action as a group, how we want to grow the organization, how we want to grow the women's movement, how we want to fight back against our multiple enemies. So we're very excited about having an actual discussion and a vote on the steps forward for our organization and the movement. And we really think that sometimes meetings are too much and we need to be able to relax and get to know each other and socialize. And so we're going to have a 2-hour break in the schedule. This is pretty unprecedented. 2-hour break to swim, socialize, take a nap, or whatever we want to do. get to know the women better on a personal level. So there'll be lots of time for that. The 2-hour break is right in the schedule. And we have a concert on Saturday night with feminist folk singer Thistle Pedersen. So we're really excited to have her coming and performing at the conference. So there's a complete schedule. It's still subject to some change, but right now we're pretty confident that's the schedule. It's on our website, and you can also register directly through the website, feministstruggle.org. You can see the link. We would love to have you. This is really an exciting gathering of feminists to actually do some political organizing and build a membership organization. We've made an effort to keep costs down. It's not as cheap as camping, but it's cheaper than the Hilton. So we think that that'll work a little bit better for some women, but it still costs some money. We are trying to offer some scholarships. We are offering a few scholarships to help women attend. And so if you need a scholarship, please apply. We are also appealing for donations. Like if you're not in the country and don't think you can come to the San Diego area for the conference, you can donate right on the FIST website, www.feministstruggle.org. This is a direct link right here, but if you see the donate button, you can donate money because we want to be independent. And so we need to have support from other feminists to do this type of organizing. All right, so this is what we envision. We want millions of women out in the streets again for the full radical feminist agenda. And that's what our aim is. Our aim is to build FIST chapters around the country, to build a membership organization. And we'd love to see you attending this important conference to move in that direction and start fulfilling that vision. That's our little logo and it's on our t-shirts. It's on the back of my t-shirt, but I'd have to turn around to just see it. Our bodies, our spaces, our sex-based rights, and we are for taking back our movement and creating an independent mass women's liberation movement that fights against all our enemies, whether it's trans activism, which is, we hear every week how horrible it is all over the world, or abortion rights or equality in the workplace, which we still don't have, equality in society. We don't have the society that we want, and we've been going backwards and facing multiple attacks. So we need to build a movement and hope we will see you there as we move forward in carrying out this vision. Thank you.
We'll hear from Carolina Franssen. We'll end with some really good news. Carolina will talk about how self-ID is no longer on the table in the Netherlands. Over to you, Carolina.
I think it's nothing short of a miracle that it happened in the Netherlands, that we got self-ID from the table. I've been personally working on it for about 4 years now, and we have a very small group of feminists who are tweeting about it all the time, trying to reach the media, trying to reach politicians. We also made a big list of incidents that happened all around the world when self-ID was introduced there. And I think that I'll put it in the chat. I think that helped because they were saying there are only a few incidents, and that's why we can easily introduce self-ID here. Nothing the matter. Men don't abuse this kind of laws. And of course, we proved them wrong by this incident list, but I think the political spectrum changed a bit at the last elections, and more anti-immigration parties got more votes, and also the new social contract, a new party, got a lot of votes, and they proposed to take this self-ID law just off the table. Don't discuss it anymore. And all the left-wing parties were really pissed off about it. They wanted debate on self-ID, while before they just vilified us, and well, all the newspapers vilified us. If they even spoke about us, they also gave, all the time they gave they gave transgenders all the place to speak their mind, and everybody in favor got all the media with them, and only we were hardly ever heard, only by special media, by alternative media. And I got on TV a few times only. I thought it would be, after a year or two, they would invite me for major talk shows, but they didn't. So it's really a miracle that we achieved this goal. But I have to say, the outgoing minister doesn't want to execute the decision of the parliament. That's one problem we have. And we have also still a list of problems here in the Netherlands. And one thing is that our gender clinics say the CAS report doesn't apply to us here in the Netherlands, and we do everything right. And we don't need to change giving puberty blockers to children. So we have a lot of work to do there to influence the gender clinics. Also, we still have, like they have had in Germany, a law that gives people the right to change their sex on their birth certificates, just with after one visit to a psychotherapist who makes a paper for them that they are really transgender, whatever that is. So this law is still working in the Netherlands, and our next goal is of course to get that law off the table. Also, we have a problem with our Equal Rights Committee, because they see self-ID as already achieved in the Netherlands, and they gave when any man asks to be allowed to a female gym or a female sport, they get support from this Committee for Equal Rights. And another problem is that there is our equal laws bill is equals gender identity to sex. So when somebody says his gender identity is female, we have to treat him the same as a woman. So also our next efforts are going to be on turning this adaptation of the equal opportunities law to return that. And of course, I don't know if that's in other countries as well, but we have this plan for a bill to make conversion therapy a crime. And conversion therapy doesn't apply only to gay conversion therapy, but also to gender conversion therapy. And a clinician is obliged to see this gender identity as a real thing and to affirm it. So this is a law we don't want to go into effect. We are fighting that one. And of course, there's also a law coming into action about hate speech, a hate speech bill in which we cannot call a man anymore. So we are not really finished with our work in the Netherlands. We are just starting, and we hope we get a lot more women to join us in this fight. And well, we have a Let Women Speak event the 21st of May. We hope these new parties will also make a new law that says a woman is an adult human female, and we mean adult human female every time we use the word woman. Thank you very much.